everybody, and welcome back to the Resilient Adult Podcast. We're happy to have you here for our fourth episode. I am Rachel, pronouns are she, her, and I'm here with Marissa, and take it away.
So, yeah, like Rachel said, I'm Marissa, the other host of this podcast. Unlike Rachel, not a teacher, a parent and financial professional, but I bring into this experience at life coaching and working with kids of this age group as well as my own kids. And if you remember, last week we began our series about education during the quarantine, dealing with distance learning, dealing with just a lot of the emotional upheaval that's going on with disrupting kids' schedules in such a severe way that we've done. And last week we focused a lot on the little kids. So we focused on that preschool to early elementary school age and talked a lot about how this is a particular struggle with those kids because of their stage of cognitive development, their preferred learning styles, and how this style of learning is just really not well suited to that age group. This week, we're going to be taking things up just a few grades along, and we're going to be talking about middle schoolers and high schoolers. Really excited because this week we're joined by two very special guests who are going to bring some personal experience to weigh in on just a lot of what's going on and some specific parts about being in middle school and high school and how all of these changes affect some students, maybe even more than others. Um, most of this episode is going to be hosted by Rachel because honestly, she is quite frankly the expert, especially when it comes to middle school. But I will definitely be weighing in on some of this. So, Rachel, why don't you take it away a bit?
All right, so I will start talking a little bit about middle school because that's what I teach. And some things that I am seeing as a teacher. And I think the number one thing that I am hearing from parents, that I'm actually hearing from kids, and that I'm seeing from myself is that even really, really independent, responsible middle school students are struggling with being this independent and responsible. They're having a hard time figuring out the difference between learning and education. They're having a hard time taking it seriously when video games and Discord chats and Instagram are right there. And so much of education at that age is tied to their grades, and nobody, including the teachers, actually really know how we're grading right now. And so a lot of this is these kids have reached an age where they need help one on one, but their parents maybe haven't done middle school math in a decade or more and don't remember exactly how to do that or simplify it or organize it. And they're also old enough to understand enough of what's going on to be afraid, to know, to be told when they are family friends that have gotten ill or neighbors that have passed on. But they're still kids, um, and they're still approaching it as kids. And I think one of the difficulties with middle school really right now is that weird sense that we as adults have that they are both older and younger than they really are. They are old enough to be told, I expect you in front of your computer at this time, logged on, paying attention. But we also need to understand that that focus is going to be what it is in a room full of 20 chattering voices where all they have to do is put up a silly picture of a beach ball and then go play on Crunker for the rest of class. So it's
Sorry, folks. I think we just had a small technical error with her recording.
a couple, but that's okay. It's all about the learning process on our end too. Spoiler alert: we don't know what we're doing, but we're figuring it out. And that really is the attitude you're going to have to take with your kids here too. They don't know what they're doing, but they're figuring it out. And the good news slash bad news at this point is that the school year is coming to an end, and at least the teachers are going to have an easier time taking some time this summer and figuring out the functionality to support your kids. Now, as you transition a little bit into high school, one of the things that I am noticing talking to high school students, and I mean, I'll circle back to the middle school bit when we get to specifically talking about suggestions that you can use at home, but I kind of want to talk about overview here a little bit. The emotional experience, even though the age difference between eighth grade and high school is very, very small, it's very different. High school students, this is supposed to be their time of building independence. This is supposed to be their time of creating themselves outside of their home, figuring out who they are as people, figuring out their identity, figuring out who they want to be going forward. And a lot of kids, whether they would use the word grief or grieving, are grieving the loss of those experiences because this is a very important, very meaningful time in their lives, particularly juniors and seniors, but I would say for all 4 years of just trying to make that transition from being a kid to being an adult with no peer support. And it's almost as important for high schoolers from a psychosocial perspective to have those social skills and socialization opportunities as it is for preschoolers. And it's different texting your friends on Instagram than it is sitting across a lunch table from them.
Yeah. And also, one thing too is, and this is coming from a bit more of like an anthropology perspective, is that a lot of our cultural rituals, we don't have many rituals per se left in our culture. And again, reminding everybody, Rachel and I, we are white, we are from the Midwest, we are middle class. That's our place we're coming from. So when I say our culture, I'm broadly speaking about American culture in general, but obviously there are many facets of American culture that this is not true for. But broadly speaking, American culture in general, we do not have many rituals left. Um,
But
and
things like
most of the
homecoming
ones we
and
do are
prom
piled into high
and
school.
yeah, I mean, a lot of that is tied to high school, and these things aren't happening. Um,
Yeah.
and as much as my knee jerk reaction to people saying I want my prom, I deserve a prom, is to be like, you want to be safe more. The reality of it is that at 17 and 18 years old, this sickness is something for the most part that's happening on the news, but the experiences that they're missing out on are real and visceral and important. And when you're dealing with high school students, it's important to remind yourself that just because you don't really care about prom in your 30s or 40s or 50s, they do. This is a big deal to these kids. High school graduation is a big deal to these kids, and we need to create a space where they can express missing it. And for those kids that are younger in high school, we need to really start asking questions like, how are we handling prerequisites with children that don't have great internet access or are not receiving, say, math class every day and aren't understanding it? Can they go from algebra to geometry or geometry to trig? Do they know enough? Because you need those skills. How are we deciding that? And then, science lab classes are also a big part of the high school learning experience. And I know as a person that is going to have a sophomore next year, and that sophomore is going to be taking chemistry, I don't have a chemistry lab in my house. I don't have a fume hood. I don't have the supplies. I don't know how they're going to handle a lab class. Um, Now, we actually have a really great opportunity here because I work with kids. I listen to them. I do a lot of talking with them, but it's been a long time since I've been 16. But I do conveniently have a handy dandy 15-year-old daughter who is in high school and was willing to talk a little bit about the experience of losing that entire experience of trying to be a high school kid from your own bedroom on a computer. Uh, so she's also never done a podcast and doesn't know what she's doing. So welcome to our We're Figuring It Out as We Go Along podcast. Hello. And you might have to talk a little louder for the microphone. But would you prefer us to ask you some questions, or do you just want to sort of talk about what it's like to be a freshman where you're only having your classes once a week?
I think I would prefer actual questions to give me a starting spot.
All right, sounds good. So, my first question for you is, because I am so concerned about the social emotional aspect, um, what is it like trying to build and maintain friendships, particularly with friends who may have less social media access without being able to see people?
It really sucks because you can't have a conversation. And like, you kind of can, but if the other person's not online, it's different asking someone a question and getting a response 30 seconds later versus 3 hours later. And even when they are online, it's not the same. You don't get to see their facial expressions, and you don't really get to have everyone there. Like, if we were at school, we would all be hanging out in the mornings, but we're not all online at the same time pretty much ever. So we don't ever really get to have those big group conversations where we all talk. And especially since some people type slower than others, it's just really, really different. And not everyone gets to say the same things. And it sucks.
So I don't know, Marissa, if you had any specific questions, or I can certainly go down my own list.
I definitely have. One thing that I'm looking at as a parent of a student who's going to be entering high school next year, and we're trying to figure out is so with the classes you're taking this year or the classes you were planning to take next year, were there any classes where you're thinking to yourself, am I going to be able to do that if we're still remote learning? Or how am I going to be able to do that because my prerequisite got all screwed up this year?
I am a little bit worried about mostly my art class because I really wanted to do a sculpture class, which I don't really have the materials to do. So if we're still doing this in September when school starts again, I have absolutely no idea how I'm going to do that. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
especially because you guys, you live in an apartment, so it's not like you have huge amounts of space to be doing like studio work.
exactly.
Well, and we are in a unique situation for a lot of families in that we have a fairly large apartment with a guest bedroom that I could convert into a studio space if we needed to. And it's not the same thing as a well stocked studio taught by competent art teachers. But it's better than nothing, which is what a lot of families are going to end up having just because of problems with
Yeah.
space. I know another thing that is pretty concerning is things like language classes, classes that really should be happening more than once a week for an hour. So I know you are starting a new language this year with a big test coming up. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that has been different now that you're at home and figuring it out on your own?
Well, my class is full immersion Spanish, so I always only had it twice a week, but I had it for an hour and a half during that twice a week block, and now I have it for an hour, sometimes to a week, depending on how many classes we have. And it's very different because there are sometimes glitches, and sometimes you can't hear right, and sometimes your microphone doesn't work. And you can't just call the teacher over and be like, what does this say? What is this word? Because you're in a Zoom class and you can't really show them what you're working on. Also, we don't really get any kind of work time because it's so packed in. That's just the lesson, and that's all we have time for. It's way harder, and being in class right now would be so much easier. And I'm definitely not picking up as much of the language as I would if we were in class. And there's this huge test coming up, and I feel like I am way less prepared for it than I would have been otherwise.
And not to put you on the spot to talk emotions on a podcast, but I can hear the frustration in your voice. Do you have any advice for those of us trying to figure it out? I feel like we need to ask kids more often what works for kids. So it's okay to say no, but is there anything that we could do to make it better?
I'm not really sure. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really the the kid who's doing it. Like, I mean, telling your kid that like this is definitely circumstances beyond their control and that like don't stress out constantly is a good thing, but also like people still need to take school seriously. So it really depends on the person what they need to hear. So I don't really know.
All right. So I probably didn't hear it here first, folks, but um, the answer that we all want to hear, which is here's the magic button we push to make it all work. Nobody really knows yet. Um, but I think it's important to talk about these things, and I think it's important to hear from the people that are being affected on both sides of the scale. Um, so thank you for your input.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we brought up, and this will kind of lead into our second special guest, is the fact that there are students for whom this is especially difficult, either because they're in a unique circumstance where their home life is maybe not the best place or safest place for them socially or emotionally, or because distance learning is particularly difficult for their particular learning style. Um, Students that have difficulty with materials management are really struggling because the teacher can't walk over and help them organize their papers. Students in the LGBTQ community that are with homophobic parents are really struggling because there's no outlet. There's no safe group of people that they can go be themselves with every day. I think it's important to really acknowledge as teachers, as parents, as members of society that we may all be in the same crisis, but we are not all experiencing the same level of trouble. I don't know who said it. I'm going to steal somebody's line, and if it's yours, you're amazing. And I think this is a great way of phrasing it: is we may all be weathering the same storm, but we are by no means all in the same boat. Um, so one of the things that is very difficult, both as a teacher and I'm certain as a student, is handling those special learning needs. Marissa, if you'd like to introduce our second guest.
Yes. So this is something my family is extremely familiar with, as I have two kids with very different, but also, we'll say, extremely important levels of special needs. And one of them is joining us right now. He's actually currently a freshman in college, so he's not actually experiencing this as a high school student. But I wanted to bring him on to talk about a little bit about how kids with IEPs and other kinds of support in school that go beyond your typical student normally receive that support, and how these changes in how school is being handled is affecting how that support can or mostly cannot be delivered. And let's see if he is connected. There you go.
Hello.
Hi. Do you want to give us a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. Um, so as Marissa said, I am a freshman in college. I just finished my first year, actually, just the other week. And most importantly for this discussion, I am on the autism spectrum. I have Asperger's syndrome, which affects all sorts of things from my ability to organize things to social communication to even just being able to sit down and focus for 2 hours on something. And these are things that I have been fortunate enough to receive quite a bit of help from during my time in the public school system. And yeah, that's me.
Okay. So I guess why don't we start with give us a little bit of background. I know obviously this is one person's experience in a single public school, but I think it's just good. A lot of people who have not had any interaction with special education or special needs or extra student support, whatever your school district refers to it as, don't actually know what that looks like. So obviously you have one type of special need, but I know also that you did interact with a lot of students in high school as part of like social learning groups who had other kinds of special needs as well. So why don't you just give us a quick overview of the kinds of support your school was providing and what that looked like before all this in like in the normal school environment?
Okay, so I think I'll start with um, um, so yeah, so I guess I'll start with the program that I was a part of, which um, they called it facilitation at the high school that I was at, and basically it's structured as though it's like a normal class. It takes up a 50-minute block of time in your school day, and essentially you're in a room with like 6 or 7 other people who need some form of special needs assistance. um, and there are a couple teachers there who like specifically specialize in helping people with sort of either executive functioning or maybe more purely academic or all sorts of special needs issues. um, and you just kind of you get like that 50-minute block of time every day to have someone sit down with you and help you kind of figure out how you're going to do what you need to do. um, I mean, personally, I got help mainly with organization and planning, and making sure that I got everything done each night that I actually needed to get done, because that was something that I struggled with, and I still really struggle with. Um, but there are also kids in there who are getting help with stuff like maybe like some of them struggled with writing, or some of them struggled with uh, doing math, and they would get like some kind of tutoring there. There are also kids who had like rather severe anxiety about things, who just needed someone to kind of uh, talk with and problem solve with. Um, and we had that 50 minutes a day where we could sit down with someone and get that help we needed. Um, and like, I mean, I think ultimately the major effect of this is that like when you're having these where you're only really going to class one day a week and you're doing it online, um, you don't get that time to sit down, and especially when you're expected to kind of handle things mostly on your own. um, People who have trouble, I mean, especially like I did with organization or time management, are going from a are going from having these sort of structured support to being like kind of completely on their own and detached from that support. You know,
So, how do you think that would have affected your ability to, you did really well in high school, actually. And I'm not saying that because I'm a bragging proud parent, although I am super proud parent. But I know like actually like it was hard for you, but you ended up doing really quite well in high school. And I know a lot of that was probably because of that extra support you were getting. How do you think it would have personally affected you if you had only had facilitation one day a week?
um, well, there's a lot of stuff that would not have gotten done. That I can definitely say, uh, because I mean, again, like one of the main thing I really got help with was time management. It was, I have all of these things I need to do, and I have this amount of time to do it. And how do I plan my time so that way all of the stuff I need to get done is done when it needs to be done? Which is a lot of uses of the word done. But um, and when you only are able to meet with someone, for one time per week, you don't get the kind of like daily planning that you get when you're meeting with someone, 50 minutes every day.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
can definitely see that affecting you.
yeah. Um,
And so I
and
know
like,
you haven't, I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, and for kids who are maybe dealing with something on the more like purely academic level, I mean, if they were struggling with math before, then they haven't magically gotten better, and they now have, 1/5 of the time to get help with it.
Yeah.
And that's really insightful comment. I was also thinking very much of students that are receiving counseling services or emotional support through those types of programs. That if you are relying
Yeah,
on
and
someone to help you
yes,
emotionally regulate for an hour 5 days a week, and suddenly it's down to whatever your teachers can do one-on-one 1 day a week, that's got to be a huge adjustment.
yeah. Well, like, and that has a like huge emotional impact because, I mean, if you're used to like essentially being able to uh, sit with someone and, you know, to a certain extent talk through your emotions like for 50 minutes a day every day, and then suddenly you don't have that. I mean, like, I know, like,
I mean, I think your
the summer
silence
after I
speaks
finished high
volumes
school.
right
Yeah.
But yeah, go
there.
ahead,
So I
Lynn.
will
You're
ask
saying the
you the
summer after
same.
high school?
Oh, yes.
Uh, so the summer after I finished high school, I developed pretty severe generalized anxiety. Um, and like from that experience, I know that like you can try your hardest, but ultimately, like if you don't have anyone to talk to, and you're going through something like that, you can't do anything. It's you know
Yeah. No, it's a struggle. I was there, obviously not experiencing it, but I was there and saw it. It's definitely a struggle. And one of the things I also wanted to bring up, so our particular school district, which you obviously were in, is probably one of the better positioned school districts for this crisis, if only because they were already doing quite a lot of the school was being done digitally. So, like every middle schooler and high schooler had a laptop issued by the school. They were using Google Classroom. So, everybody was already familiar with these tools going into it. Um, but they weren't using them to run everything. It was in addition to the normal school day, not in lieu of the normal school day.
yeah.
And thinking back on that, like because you had experienced um, having that already be a normal part of your day, I think you have a pretty good picture of what it would be like to just switch to that as being your entire schooling experience. Um, I would just say realistically, how hard would it have been for you to pass?
I think it would have been nearly impossible if I'm being entirely honest. Um, like,
And I just want to put this in perspective because obviously I know you, Rachel knows you quite well. But for the folks at home, we're talking about a kid who's currently going to a relatively well respected college on essentially a full ride scholarship. So, and he literally just said, like, in this circumstance, he wouldn't have been able to pass high school.
And this is also a child that has a fair amount of support at home.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask you the same question I asked earlier, and I don't expect you to have the magic make it better button either. But as someone who has the perspective of the student under your belt, what is it do you think that we could do to help make this better? And it's fine
I
if you have
mean,
no ideas because I'm not sure that I do either.
personally, what I would do is, and I don't know how realistic this is because I know there's also a certain amount of a funding problem, especially for like schools that aren't mine, that don't necessarily get a lot of funding from local taxes. Maybe all they have is whatever the federal government is giving out at the time. And but I think ultimately, instead of doing this thing where it's like 1 day a week, I think it would be better if it was just like the normal school day, but you just did everything by video call. Because like, and I like this is definitely exacerbated in people who are part of the special needs program. But I mean, even for like your average student, 1 day a week really isn't enough. Even your typical college class usually meets at least 2 days a week, and when they do, they meet for like an hour and a half. It's not like you're meeting for like 45 minutes once a week. Like,
I mean, I think time is really the best solution. So I see where you're coming from. And if that
yeah.
becomes feasible, that would be wonderful, certainly. Is there any final thoughts that you wanted to answer or offer?
Let's see. I guess the main thing that I want to qualify everything that I previously said with is the fact that, I'm very fortunate to have been in a school system that, is extremely well able to handle something like this. And also like just had the resources to do stuff like provide a solid special needs program. And I know there are a lot of people for whom that is absolutely not the case. And like to a certain extent, I think that we should be thinking as well about, if it's this much of a struggle for people who have this special needs access who don't get it, like all of the people who don't have it to begin with, I guess is my point.
All right.
That's possibly an episode for the future: school funding and equality and outcomes of equality in America. But thank you so much for joining us, for providing your perspective. Really, really appreciate it.
I think it's very important to hear from both sides of the table, so to speak. So yes, definitely. Thank you. So having heard from two kids that basically reinforce everything that we said last week about how, yeah, this is difficult on the teachers, it's difficult on the parents, it's difficult on the kids. Everybody's hands feel very tied right now. So, what are some things that we can do to kind of feel a little more in control, to sort of follow the do what you can methodology of surviving these sorts of situations? So I have 10 kind of education-based resiliency skills that I would suggest to parents. The first is practice adaptability. This is not a time when we can rely on schedules. So make it part of your daily mindful practice to just accept. Sometimes you have to say it out loud. This is frustrating. I would like my child to be in school right now working with a teacher that remembers how to do this. But just like we're doing with our podcast here, and you've heard all the glitches, kind of take a deep breath and be like, I can handle this. We are a very adaptable species. We don't like it, but we can do it. And it gets easier when we verbalize to ourselves, particularly for kids, that's what we're doing right now. We are practicing adaptability. We are practicing flexibility. Talk out loud to your kids every day about the value of knowing things and the value of being independent and the value of understanding that with independence comes responsibility.
I would just add in, as the parent of a couple different special needs kids with some very different kinds of special needs. Right now, if you know that your kid is struggling because of the lack of whatever support they previously had, or because they just, whatever issue they have been an issue before, but now is in this new circumstance, I just reach out to the counselors, reach out to your school, let them know. I mean, you'd like to think it'd be a kind of duh, but they are dealing with so much right now that it is literally impossible, I think, for them to honestly have the time to go, oh, hey, that kid who I know sometimes gets confused about assignments but doesn't actually have an IEP in place because most of the time they manage. Um, they're probably not gonna think through to reach out to you and say, hey, do they need something?
Well, also,
You know,
think in terms of if your child is a predominantly auditory learner, they've been fine in a classroom where every day things have been orally explained to them. Now they're having to work from written instructions. And if they're struggling, by all means, reach out to the counseling department or the teacher. Um, some things are not going to be on people's radar because it has never been a problem before, or because your kid's pretty adaptable, but they don't know how to adapt to the situation. So, certainly, absolutely reach out for help, which actually leads to my next suggestion, which is fostering social skills in a limited environment, which is a very teacher way of saying encourage your
hey,
children to make
Rachel,
phone calls. Yes.
speaking of adaptability and tech problems, we're not picking you up at all.
Ah, you can't hear me.
You just got all distorted sounding.
All right.
Yes.
Is this any better? Because we are reaching the time of night that my internet doesn't like. Any
Okay,
luck?
well, I can hear you now and you don't sound like a distorted robot, so I think that's good.
All right, so we'll go as long as we can. Uh, Fostering social skills in a limited environment means kind of pushing your kids to reach out, particularly kids that are introverted, or kids that are prone to anxiety, or kids that are a little self conscious on tech. They're hiding in their rooms. They're not reaching out. They don't know how to reach out, and they're lonely. Make as much as is possible, make time to sit and talk to the people in your household out loud in person, but also see if you can find some platforms where your kids can play cards online, or there are Dungeons and Dragons options online, or help them set up Zoom calls. Be the social coordinator for your kids because they don't have that morning before school time anymore, and they don't really know how to create it. The next suggestion is I've seen so many things on the internet about, take a bubble bath and take a deep breath, and self-care is more than bubble baths. If you are struggling, there are resources to reach out. If you feel helpless or hopeless or overwhelmed, there are resources available. There are people you can call, there are websites you can go to. Encourage your kids to reach out, and reach out for yourself too. Because if this is triggering severe anxiety, if this is triggering mild agoraphobia, a bubble bath is not going to fix it. And mental health is health. If you don't take care of your mental health, you are not going to be able to support yourself or your children. You're not going to be able to manage any of this. And if you are someone that's like, I've started yoga and I've learned to make sourdough and this is really awesome, then I am amazingly thrilled for you. But a lot of people are struggling. And it's okay to admit that, and it's okay to look for help. This isn't perfect, but it also isn't permanent. It's okay to be uncomfortable. The other
No,
thing
there's a
is
tagline
that,
for our podcast forever. It's okay to be uncomfortable.
yes, yes, stop hiding from it. Discomfort is how we learn. Um, and then, all those 1950s stories about kids with chores. Well, they don't have sports practice, and they don't have play rehearsal, and they don't have band. So they need to learn how to clean a house and cook a meal and do the dishes. And this isn't a punishment, but these are life skills. And we know we don't have home ec class, but we do have a kitchen and a family that needs dinner. So let your kids be in charge of it and eat what they make, even if it's terrible. Because they're not going to get better if they don't.
And tell them how they're doing it wrong. I mean, you can make suggestions, but the way you learn that sort of stuff is actually by doing it. If you, cut your onions badly and they burn and make a big mess that's half raw and half burned, you pretty quickly figure out that you need to cut them evenly.
Right. But yeah, I mean, if your kids cook dinner, provided that you're not honestly, legitimately concerned about food poisoning, eat what they put in front of you and find something good about it, even if it is only, hey, you worked really hard on this.
Yeah.
We're not going to die if we're bored. So accept that boredom is going to happen too. There's going to be a point in time when you look at Netflix and are just done. That's not a bad thing. And you know what? And this is from a literature teacher, but I truly believe this in my soul. And actually, the research backs me up. When in doubt, if you're worried about their social emotional needs being met, if you're worried about them meeting benchmarks for reading and vocabulary, if you're worried about their understanding of history, make them read. Buy a book, order it on Kindle, order it on Amazon, get it through the library, whatever you need to, and just create a time where the kids have to read. It is shocking how much they will continue to learn. And one very real suggestion that sounds really silly, reach out to homeschool groups. Sometimes there's a membership to like join their webpage or whatever, but honestly, they've been doing this on purpose for a while. They can help you get organized. They can help you find resources. Plus, I've never met somebody that homeschools that wasn't super excited about it and really want other people to be super excited about it. And these are people that know how to help you.
And
So
who
that's
knows how to find homeschooling groups and get in touch with one that works for you because, maybe you're not super religious. A lot of homeschool groups are, but there are some that are not. Is your local library, because those homeschool groups spend a lot of time at the library working with
at the
librarians
library.
to supplement their homeschooling. And although the libraries are closed in most places in America right now, a lot of them are open online. I know I have personal connections with one in particular in my community, and they are literally doing live chat support, answering questions like, how do I get connected with a homeschool group in my area?
So there you go. That'd be a practical, concrete thing that you can do. And I think that kind of brings what we wanted to say this week to a close. Again, take a deep breath. It's okay to be uncomfortable. We will all figure it out.
And if you need more than just a little bit of self-care and a lot of determination, reach out, get help. There's a lot of people out there right now who know, we're all struggling, but some people were already struggling before they got here, and some people are going to be affected even more. And they are there for you, whether it's a hotline or it's finding a counselor who can meet online to talk to you, or whether it's just a really good supportive friend who has the bandwidth to help you right now. Reach out, get help, and don't be mad at yourself, because it's kind of almost absurdist theater. It's reality, but it's a reality none of us were planning for or expecting, except for maybe a handful of folks who spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, the good thing and the bad thing about the situation is that really nobody knows how to do this. So you can't be doing it wrong, but there isn't an expert to help you be doing it right. But yes, reach out and support each other. If you're a person that can be a support, reach out and check on people you think might need help. Until next time, it was great chatting with everyone, and we will see you next week.
All right, looking forward to it. Good night.